Have you ever been in this position? You're in the mood to play a video game tonight, and you've got a huge list of games in your backlog that you want to play, but you just haven't started them up yet. You might even own these games and have never even started them up, but instead of booting up something new, you say to yourself, I'm gonna play Mario 64 again. Now, you've probably beaten Mario 64 dozens of times by now, and there are tons of critically acclaimed, exciting new experiences that you also really want to dig into, but you wind up going back to a game that you've already beaten. This is a demonstration of strong replay value, or a game's ability to keep you coming back even after you've already beaten it. In this video, I want to delve into replay value, how many games that we know and love keep us coming back, and how developers can tap into their game's replay potential. As a bit of a disclaimer, I'm mostly going to be focusing on single-player games for this video. Multiplayer games have entirely different design philosophies, so to research how developers can keep players coming back to their multiplayer games, whether online or on the couch, would be a video in itself, honestly. For this video, I want to focus on how to reel players back into single-player games and how we can get recaptivated by games that we've already experienced. Open world games are probably one of the first examples that come to mind when I think of games with tons of replay value. Games like Breath of the Wild and Final Fantasy XV have large, sprawling worlds that the players can traverse at their leisure. While these games do have a primary story that drives the player towards an inevitable end goal, their designs also heavily encourage the player to go off of the main path and explore. These games are usually littered with things to find and missions to accomplish. For example, in Final Fantasy XV, players can engage in hunts that will earn them money and items, they can partake in side missions, they can fight optional bosses, they can fish, etc, etc. Breath of the Wild has side missions, but the primary focus of this game's open world is shrines. These shrines contain unique puzzles within them, and upon completing each one you will get a spirit ore, which players can use to upgrade Link. They can also find new weapons, ingredients, and much more in this open world, which prevents players from getting bored while exploring. Both of these games have an overarching story and a final boss that is completable without exploring much, but by naturally deviating them from the set paths the game provides even a little bit, the players will be rewarded with more experience, more hearts, more stamina, and more money. The open world structure is an excellent way to entice players to come back even after they've completed the main story, because there are usually completion bonuses and new things to find on the map after the game is completed. However, open worlds tend to struggle a bit when it comes to difficulty. Breath of the Wild does a good job of incrementally introducing more and more difficult enemies and terrains to the player as they naturally explore the world, but unfortunately, since the shrines can be done in any order and the game has really no way of assessing a player's knowledge and skill level, the shrines are often really easy and they don't really ramp up in difficulty much outside of a few exceptions. Final Fantasy XV scales difficulty in its hunts and side missions by locking them to the minimum level that you need to be to complete them, but this makes the game feel much more restrictive and less open-ended. With this being said, players love to pour hundreds of hours into open world games, and I definitely understand why. Another example of a way to continue to bring players back is by making every playthrough a unique experience. There are a variety of games that succeed at this in different ways, so I'll go through a bunch of them and explain how they do this. One of the first franchises that I instantly think of when I think of replayable games is Star Fox. On paper, Star Fox games are relatively linear on-rail shooters. However, Star Fox on the Super Nintendo features 3 difficulty settings that are essentially 3 different versions of the game. They all contain different levels, which means that if you play the game through on levels 1, 2, and 3, they're going to be entirely different experiences. Star Fox 2 takes this idea and expands on it, creating this world map that you can fly around freely in. This allows you to choose how to tackle the levels and enemy ships coming at you. Finally, Star Fox 64 has a variety of branching paths, so that if players fulfill secret criteria, they can go down an alternate route to different levels than they would have if they just flew through the stage normally. This is really fun because players can choose which levels they want to play, and by attempting to complete these additional objectives, they will likely take entirely different routes to beat the game in their multiple playthroughs. I love this structure because it allows players to make their own path as they complete the game. There are also games that have multiple endings based upon the player's decisions within the game. Now, a clear distinction to make here is that I'm not talking about games like Persona 4, which has a few endings based on whether you answer some questions correctly or incorrectly. I'm talking about games like Catherine, Undertale, or Shadow the Hedgehog. In these games, the player is presented presented with a variety of choices to make, and these choices will affect how the story continues and eventually ends. In Undertale, players are given the option to spare or kill any enemies or bosses that they encounter. These decisions impact the game in both small and huge ways, from dialogue being different, to players getting special scenes, to entire mechanics being removed, and the music even changing. Catherine is different in its own way, as Vincent is forced to make tons of decisions that will eventually cause the game to end in one of many different ways, but these decisions do not really impact the actual gameplay, they're more for story purposes. If players are more interested in the puzzles rather than the story, this might not add replay value for them, but the additional endless puzzles and Rapunzel minigame would. I'm not going to go over how Shadow the Hedgehog does this because it would be a bit redundant and I really don't want to relive that game's story. Roguelikes are a great example of how games can make each playthrough unique and interesting. Games like Hades have engaging level-up systems that will help ensure that each attempt looks different because you now have new tools at your disposal. But I think one of the best examples of a roguelike that creates a new challenge for every playthrough is Spelunky. Spelunky randomly generates all of its levels so that players cannot memorize the level layouts and get used to how the levels are structured. Instead, Spelunky forces the player to master its mechanics rather than its levels, which is incredibly engaging. This not only makes every playthrough of Spelunky entirely unique, but it adds serious replay value by encouraging the player to master its mechanics, which is a great segue into my final category for replay value. At the start of this video, I mentioned replaying games like Mario 64 over and over again, and this game does not really fit in any of the previously mentioned categories. However, Mario 64 is extremely replayable because of one primary attribute: Mario's movement. See, even if you've played Mario 64 tons of times, you keep coming back because Mario is so satisfying to control that it becomes fun just to play the game again, but this time a little bit more optimized. Mario Odyssey realized how much replay value Mario's movement kit added, so Nintendo added an absolutely genius endgame mode, Luigi's Balloon World. Now, I understand that this is low-key a multiplayer mode, but you don't play against people in real time or anything. Luigi's Balloon World allows players to put their mastery of Mario's moveset and their knowledge of the level design to the test. Finding tons of balloons in this mode is almost more captivating than the main game. Speedrunning is also a great example of players getting replay value out of their favorite games because of their movement and mechanics alone. Super Metroid is a genius game. Speedrunners have mastered Samus's controls and have understood the mechanics of Super Metroid so much that they now know how to beat the game in a much shorter time. And I believe that this is proof of how replayable Super Metroid is. If your game creates a speedrunning community that is consistently trying to optimize and master its movement and mechanics, I believe that is proof that your game is incredibly replayable. Finally, rewarding completionists in a satisfying way is a great way to keep players invested and to help them feel that the time that they spent with your game is worth it. Alternate endings, New Game Plus, and unlockable characters and stages are all great ways to entice players to come back and find everything, even if they've already finished the story and rolled the end credits. Giving players a different picture in the credits or a new title screen are fine, I suppose, but giving them a reason to return to a game that they've already 100%ed will make them feel rewarded for the time that they spent with your game. Replayability has always been an elusive goal that many games and game designers strive to achieve. Even though there are many routes to accomplish this goal, I hope that this video is able to shed some light on how games can be structured or amended to have more replay value and to keep players coming back, even after they thought they were done with one of their favorite games. I was going to also discuss life sim games like Animal Crossing and Stardew Valley in this video as well, but I think that their structure with macro goals and micro goals are much more unique and could almost warrant their own video. So, if that sounds like an interesting topic to you, let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.